It is May 19th, 1536, and you are standing on a scaffold built inside the walls of the Tower of London, in front of a crowd of 1,000 people who have come to watch you die. You are dressed in gray damask trimmed with fur, your hair pulled back beneath a simple cap. 3 years ago, you wore a crown in this same fortress, and the entire kingdom bent its knee to you. Today, a French swordsman stands a few feet away, sharpening a blade that Henry VIII personally arranged to have shipped from Calais. Because even in ending your life, he wanted everyone to know he could still be generous. You are 35 years old. You are about to become the first Queen of England ever executed by her own husband. But this story does not begin on a scaffold. It begins 19 years earlier, in a manor house in Kent, with a clever, restless girl who was never supposed to matter at all. You are born around 1501 at Hever Castle, the second daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a diplomat with sharp instincts and sharper ambition, and Elizabeth Howard, whose family name carries more weight in English nobility than your father's ever will. You are not the pretty one. That title belongs to your older sister, Mary, whose soft prettiness will later catch a king's eye long before yours does. What you have instead is something harder to name and far more dangerous. A mind that never stops calculating, and a face that is interesting rather than beautiful, the kind people remember for reasons they can't quite explain. At 12, your father secures you a position most girls in England would kill for, a place in the household of Margaret of Austria, in the sophisticated court of the Netherlands. You arrive barely speaking French and leave a year later fluent, poised, and educated in a way almost no Englishwoman of your rank will ever be. Then you move again, to the French royal court itself, serving Queen Claude, absorbing everything. Fashion, wit, music, the particular art of being watched by powerful men without ever looking desperate for their attention. You spend nearly 7 years in France. You learn to dance in a way that makes rooms go quiet. You learn French poetry well enough to write your own. You learn, above all, the one lesson that will define the rest of your life: that a woman's only real leverage in a world built entirely by and for men is the ability to control exactly what she gives away and exactly when. You are 20 when you return to England in 1522, and the English court has never seen anyone quite like you. You are not conventionally beautiful by the standard of the time. Your eyes are too dark, your neck too long, your manner too foreign, too confident, too obviously intelligent for a woman still unmarried. But you are magnetic in a way none of the pale, compliant English roses around you can compete with. Within months, you become the most talked about woman at court, not because men want to marry you, at first, but because they cannot stop watching you. Your sister Mary has already been the king's mistress by this point, quietly, briefly, forgettably. You watch what happens to her, the affair, the dismissal, the way she is simply absorbed back into ordinary court life once Henry loses interest, as if nothing happened at all. You file this away. You understand something Mary never did. Being wanted and being disposable are, for a woman in this court, very often the same thing. You fall in love once, genuinely, with a young nobleman named Henry Percy. The match is broken up before it can become a marriage. Cardinal Wolsey intervenes on the king's orders, for reasons nobody explains to you at the time. You do not yet know that the king has already noticed you. You only know that something you wanted has been taken away by men with more power than you have, without so much as a conversation. It is not the last time this will happen. It is, however, the last time you allow it to happen without a fight. By 1526, Henry VIII is unmistakably, obsessively pursuing you. He is 35, married for 17 years to Catherine of Aragon, and increasingly desperate for a son Catherine has failed to give him. Only one surviving child between them, a daughter, Mary. He has had mistresses before. He assumes you will become one of them, the way your sister did, the way dozens of women before you have. You say no, not coyly, not as a strategy to raise your price, though it will function as exactly that. You say no because you have watched what happens to the king's mistresses, and you have no intention of becoming a footnote in someone else's marriage. Henry writes you letters. 17 of them survive to this day. Increasingly desperate, increasingly undignified for a king, begging for your affection, complaining that he has been waiting a whole year for an answer you have not given him. You keep him at arm's length for 6 years. 6 years of refusal, while an entire kingdom's future hangs on it. Henry decides the solution is not to give up. The solution is to end his marriage to Catherine of Aragon entirely and marry you instead. What begins as one king's infatuation becomes, within a few short years, a full theological and political crisis that will fracture England's relationship with the Roman Catholic Church forever. Henry calls it his great matter. Historians will later call it the English Reformation. You call it, privately, the price of saying no to a king who has never once in his life been told no. The Pope refuses to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine. Her nephew is the Holy Roman Emperor, and Rome has no interest in insulting him. So Henry does something no English king has done before. He breaks from Rome entirely. He declares himself the supreme head of the Church of England. He forces through his own annulment, using English courts and English bishops loyal to him alone. Thomas Cromwell rises as the architect of this new machinery. Thomas More, who cannot in conscience support it, will eventually lose his head over his refusal. All of it, the schism, the executions of good men, the reshaping of an entire nation's religious identity, moves through history's gears because you said no to being anyone's mistress. You marry Henry in a secret ceremony in January 1533. You are already pregnant. This is not an accident. The child, everyone assumes, will be the son that legitimizes everything, that makes the entire upheaval worth its cost. In June, you are crowned Queen of England at Westminster Abbey in a coronation so lavish it nearly bankrupts the royal treasury. You ride through London in a litter covered in white cloth of gold. The crowds along the route are notably, pointedly silent. They love Catherine. They do not yet love you, and many of them never will. 3 months later, in September 1533, you give birth to a girl. You name her Elizabeth. The disappointment in the room is so total that the celebratory jousting tournament already planned for the birth of a prince is quietly cancelled. Henry, to his credit in this single moment, does not turn on you immediately. He tells courtiers that a healthy daughter proves healthy sons will surely follow. You believe him because you have to. You do not yet know that Elizabeth is the only child of yours who will survive infancy, and that she, not any son you might have had, will eventually become the greatest monarch England has ever produced. You do not live to see any of that. The next 2.5 years become an increasingly desperate arithmetic of pregnancy and loss. You suffer at least 2 more failed pregnancies, a miscarriage in 1534, and in January 1536, a devastating loss of what would have been a son, delivered too early to survive. On the very day Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, cast aside for you, is buried. Henry, watching from the doorway of your recovery chamber, says nothing comforting. He simply looks at you the way a man looks at an investment that has stopped paying returns. You know, watching that expression settle over his face, exactly what it means. You have seen it before, on the face of every man in this court who decided a woman's usefulness had quietly expired. You have simply never seen it directed at you, until now. By this point, another woman has already caught Henry's eye, Jane Seymour, one of your own ladies-in-waiting, quiet and unassuming in precisely the ways you have never been. You watch him give her gifts. You watch the court's attention begin its slow, cruel migration away from you and toward her. The same migration you once benefited from at Catherine's expense. You understand the mechanism perfectly because you built your entire rise on it. Understanding it does not make it hurt less to be on the other side of it now. You are still queen. You still have allies. your father, your uncle the Duke of Norfolk, your brother George, who has been at your side since childhood and remains one of the very few people in this court you actually trust. But allies in Henry's court are a currency that devalues overnight, and you are about to discover exactly how fast. What almost nobody remembers about you, what history flattens into the single word schemer, is that you spent your years as queen doing more than surviving Henry's moods. You used your position to actively patronize religious reformers, to fund the printing and distribution of English translations of Scripture at a time when doing so carried real risk. You gave alms personally, kept detailed records of the poor relief you funded, and surrounded yourself with scholars and reformist thinkers who saw in you something rarer than a king's obsession, a genuine intellectual ally. You were, by the account of even some of your critics, unusually well-read, sharply funny in a way the English court found unsettling in a woman, and fluent in exactly the kind of theological argument that made bishops uncomfortable. None of this will save you. Intelligence in a queen is an asset only for as long as the king finds it charming rather than threatening. And Henry's tolerance for being intellectually matched by his wife has an expiration date, same as everything else about his affections. In April 1536, the machinery turns against you with a speed that will only make sense later. Once you understand it was never really about what you did. It was about what Henry needed to be true. Thomas Cromwell, the same man who helped engineer your marriage, now needs you gone. He has his own reasons, political and personal, that have nothing to do with your guilt or innocence. Henry needs a new wife who can give him a legitimate son without the theological complications your marriage inherited. And you, increasingly, are a woman who argues with the king in front of his ministers, who has opinions about religious reform and foreign policy that Cromwell finds inconvenient, who has made enemies of exactly the kind of men who can end a queen. The accusations arrive within days of each other, each one more absurd than the last. You are accused of adultery, with 5 men, including a court musician named Mark Smeaton, who confesses under what can only be described as pressure that borders on torture. You are accused of plotting the king's death, and in the accusation designed specifically to make you unforgivable, unrecoverable, radioactive. You are accused of incest with your own brother, George. There is no credible evidence for any of it. Dates don't align. Alibis exist and are ignored. The court that tries you is presided over by your own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, who reads your death sentence with what witnesses describe as visible discomfort, but no hesitation. You are given no real defense. You are not permitted a lawyer. You are, in the truest sense, not being tried. You are being disposed of, with just enough procedural theater to make it look otherwise to the rest of Europe. The arrest itself happens on May 2nd, at a joust, a May Day tournament you are watching from the royal box, cheering for riders the way you have 100 times before. Partway through, you notice Henry rise abruptly and leave without a word, without the customary courtesies, his face unreadable in a way that 18 years of court life has taught you to fear more than any shouted accusation. You are escorted from Greenwich to the Tower by barge that same afternoon, not through the main water gate used for state occasions, but through the court gate, a smaller, more private entrance, as though even your arrest is being managed to minimize spectacle before the verdict is even decided. You ask the men escorting you whether you are going to a dungeon. They tell you, with the particular blankness of men following orders they don't fully understand themselves, that you will be lodged in the same royal apartments where you stayed the night before your coronation 3 years earlier. You laugh, a short, involuntary, horrified sound, at the cruelty of that particular detail, intentional or not. You are found guilty on May 15th, 1536, in a trial held inside the Tower itself, judged by a jury of peers that includes the same uncle who once helped negotiate your marriage. Your brother George is executed 2 days before you, on Tower Green, along with 4 other men whose only real crime was proximity to you. You watch, or hear, from your chamber window, the sounds of a scaffold being erected for people you love, for a version of you that once believed cleverness and control could protect a person from a king's changing appetite. You are told you will die by beheading. Henry, in what he apparently considers an act of mercy, arranges for you to be executed not by the common English axe, which frequently required multiple strikes and a slow, brutal death, but by a skilled swordsman brought specially from Calais, trained in the French method, which is faster and, by the standards of the time, considered more dignified. You will spend your final days absorbing the fact that the man who destroyed the Catholic Church of an entire nation to marry you is now demonstrating his love, one final time, through the manner of your execution. Your final days pass inside the tower's royal apartments in a strange, suspended quiet. You are attended by ladies you don't fully trust, at least one of whom reports your every word back to Cromwell's men. You alternate between composure and collapse. Witnesses describe you laughing inexplicably 1 hour, weeping the next, remarking with dark clarity that there will be no doubt about you once you are gone, since your executioner is very good, and your neck is so little. It is impossible to know, for 100 years later, whether this was genuine gallows humor, or simply a mind fracturing quietly under a pressure no rehearsal could have prepared you for. You write no great final letter that survives with certainty, though a document attributed to you, addressed to Henry, defending your innocence and asking him to consider the unworthy ends to which he has been brought by advisers around him, circulates in the historical record, disputed by scholars ever since, its authorship as uncertain as almost everything else about your final month alive. You ask to take the sacrament twice and swear your innocence before God each time, a serious act in an age that believed false oaths before communion condemned a soul to hell. Even your harshest enemies at court privately note this. It does not change the outcome. The verdict was never really a question of evidence. It was a question of what Henry needed, and Henry needed you gone. On the morning of May 19th, you are led out onto Tower Green. You climb the scaffold steps yourself, without assistance, spine straight. The same posture that once made an entire French court go quiet when you entered a room. You give a short speech, measured, careful, giving Cromwell and Henry nothing they can use against your daughter after you are gone. You praise the king as a good, gentle, and sovereign lord, words that cost you everything to say, and protect the one person you have left to protect, a 2-year-old girl named Elizabeth, who will grow up without ever really knowing you, who will be declared illegitimate within days of your death, and who will nonetheless rise to become the most powerful woman in English history. You kneel. You are blindfolded. You continue praying, quietly, waiting for a blow you cannot see coming. The swordsman, in a small mercy of misdirection, calls out for his sword before he draws it, a trick to make you turn your head slightly, so the final strike catches you off guard rather than braced and rigid with fear. It works exactly as intended. The single stroke is, by every account, fast and clean. It is over, in less time than it takes to describe it. 11 days later, Henry marries Jane Seymour. History does not linger long on what happens to you next in the immediate sense. Your body, without a proper coffin prepared, is placed in an old arrow chest and buried beneath the floor of the tower's chapel, St. Peter ad Vincula, in a grave that will not even be marked for centuries. The kingdom moves on with a speed that tells you everything about how disposable even a queen becomes, once a king decides she is finished. But history is patient in ways courts are not. The daughter you protected with your final words, the girl declared illegitimate, stripped of her title, raised for years in genteel obscurity while half the court assumed she would never matter, becomes Queen Elizabeth I in 1558. She reigns for 45 years. She defeats the Spanish Armada. She presides over an English Renaissance that produces Shakespeare, that expands England's reach across the known world, that will be remembered centuries later as a golden age. She never marries. She never fully explains why. But those closest to her note, more than once, that she keeps a ring containing a portrait of you. Her mother, the Queen Nobody, was supposed to remember kindly for the rest of her life. You were called a witch, a whore, a schemer, a woman who destroyed a church and a marriage and, ultimately, herself. Some of that was true. Ambition and calculation carried you from a manor house in Kent to a crown, and both of those same qualities made you enemies patient enough to wait for the one moment you were vulnerable enough to fall. You built your entire life on the principle that a woman's only power was controlling what she gave and when, and in the end, the one thing you could never control was a king's need to believe his failures were always someone else's fault. What the men who executed you never accounted for is the part of your legacy you didn't plan and couldn't have controlled even if you tried. A daughter who inherited your intelligence, your composure under pressure, and your refusal to let any man's disappointment define what she was capable of. Henry spent a fortune and broke an empire's religious foundation trying to force the world to give him a son. What he got instead, through you, was the greatest queen his country would ever know. They wrote you into history as a cautionary tale. Your daughter rewrote what that history was allowed to mean.